Okay, and we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to what are we in the end of August 2020, and we've had a little break in between having these regular calls with Brian. This has been had plenty on his plate, finishing his latest book, which is exciting. I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more as we get into the chat tonight. But thanks everyone for being here. If you're catching this on a replay and you haven't met Brian or familiar with Brian's material before, Brian's an author, an inspirational speaker, a philosopher, and a holistic natural therapist. And the basis of this evening's talk, we're going to be talking about what are emotions and the truth about them and how to transcend them. And I can absolutely guarantee you that what's going to be shared tonight will be completely different to anything you've ever heard if you're not familiar with Brian's material. So buckle your seatbelts, we're in for a fun ride. And prior to actually getting into the topic, most of you will be aware that Brian, subject to lockdowns, is about to hit the road at the end of next month. So exciting to have him back here in Adelaide, and border opening pending in Victoria as well. So what we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time having a chat about the events that Brian is running. There's a couple of new ones there, and just a general update as to what's been happening, because it's been quite some time since we actually jumped on a call. So look forward to any questions as they come along in the chat box, and diving into tonight's topic. For those of you that haven't seen Brian's book, The Nature of Life, How to Remain at Peace in the Modern World, his 600-page textbook. I've got copies here back in stock again in Adelaide, and obviously you can order them directly from Brian. And part of what Brian will be sharing tonight is in the book, but Brian's had some exciting breakthroughs of recent times in terms of how to bring all this material together and present it from a different perspective. So Brian, super excited to have you back again. Thanks for being here, and over to you to give us an update of what's happening.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride these last couple of months. I moved to Montville, I think it was back at the end of May. It was supposed to be a change of lifestyle, but I've been busier than ever before. So, the old saying, if you want to make God laugh, you tell him your plans. So it's been ridiculous. I don't think I've had more than 3 days off in the last however many months. So it's been pretty full on. So it's sort of catching up with me a bit. I'm just sort of burning the candle at both ends to get everything ready. But like Mark just said, I've had some rather massive breakthroughs since I've been here. That's part of the reason why I've been so busy, because the sheer volume of information that I've sort of been, not so that more or less creating or developing, it's just sort of putting the pieces of the material that I've already created together. And then that, if we put two things together, that creates a whole other object or product or something by itself, and it just keeps growing exponentially, and it's practically impossible to keep up with. So that's been a big challenge for a long time, but it's been especially that way since moving here. But it's been that way, well, pretty well since.
Oh, Brian will be back in a sec.
Yep. Sorry,
that's okay. That dodgy USB, all good.
Just tapped on the USB with my foot. So yeah, so it's all sort of been growing exponentially since I started doing plant medicines, and I've been doing them quite regularly since. And that's part of why I have taken on this new approach that I've got, where up until maybe 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, that I've been working with the top-down perspective, whereas now that I've sort of been working with the bottom-up perspective, I've had to create a whole new model and a way of communicating the exactness of what I talk about. And so I've been working on that model, and because I've sort of basically taken everything I've done and inverted it into the bottom-up approach, it's just as infinite and as expansive going from the bottom up as it is the top down. So I've been working on getting down to the exact detail and how to bring it all together in a model, and how it all just flows together. So that's what I've been doing, probably since early in the year. And I've been working towards creating the new workshop, the Hole-in-One workshop, in that time. And it's going to be a ripper. It's going to blow everyone's socks off, I think, because it's going to be a summary of everything I've been working on for the last, 6 years. And I'm mainly doing it because, everybody knows, I'm already bored with everything I've been working on up till recently. And this is part of the reason why I'm doing this call tonight, because the whole topic of emotions is one of the main topics that everyone talks about when they're talking about healing. And personally, I don't like talking about emotions at all. And the reason why I'm doing this call is to get it all off my chest and help everybody else maybe see it all in a different light, so they too can drop all the stories that all the emotions are creating and perpetuating, and maybe just redirect their attention towards the root cause of the emotions, rather than actually endlessly giving their time and energy to the emotions themselves. So as everybody knows, I've got a very different perspective and approach to most things. And emotions is probably the main one. And I've done a lot of workshops and things like that over the years, and as you know, most of you know, that 80% of my clients are doctors and practitioners and therapists of some kind. And I always ask them, what do you think the priorities are when you're working with somebody? And probably 90% of people say, the emotions. And I actually have the opposite spin to that. Not that that's a surprise to most people that know me, but I'm going to explain how and why there's another way we can look at the emotions, and that's what tonight's going to be about. And what I'm going to share tonight is just a little snippet of what I'm going to be presenting in the Hole-in-One workshop. What I'm going to be presenting in that is well beyond what I've done up till now. And this is only just going to be like a tip of the iceberg of what I'm going to be talking about. Because a lot of you know that I like dealing with psychology, particularly spiritual psychology. And this is helping people make the transition from the dualistic state of mind into the conscious state of mind. And if people can't do that consciously and deliberately, then they're stuck in the bottomless pit of emotions. And as I'm about to explain to you, I'll go through in detail every component of these emotions and how and why they appear and so on, and how and why different things come up at different times. But with that sort of the residue of everything I'm going to be talking about in terms of in the Hole-in-One workshop, I'm going to go right into the true nature and origins of all the states of mind and all the different states of being. And that's probably my favorite topic now, because I have to do this bottom-up material more so than the top-down. I've actually been quite enjoying putting it all together in the way that I have been. Like I call it my nutty professor state when I get out there on my whiteboard and start explaining it to people. And I've sort of taken the essence of all the different opportunities I've had, either sharing with clients or friends or colleagues, the latest material. So I call it the 7 times factor. If I explain something 7 times, then I basically master the way of explaining it and articulating it. And then that keeps building the model on which I can share. So that's what I've been doing. And now that all the basic materials online with all the blogs and the BitChute videos, I don't want to talk about everything I've been talking about up until now. I want to introduce a whole new level of material to all the existing workshops, like the data meditation, the universal kinetics, the universal Ho'oponopono, and the nature of life one, and the Hole-in-One. I'm going to be able to start where I've been leaving off, and that for me is exciting, because, as you know, like with the ADHD and dyslexia, I get extremely bored extremely quickly. And if I don't ever have to talk about emotions again after tonight, I'll be very, very enormously happy. So that's the idea. I just want to get all this off my chest, give people something to think about, a means of changing their perspective and approach to what they're perhaps stuck in. And so then So I'll just quickly cover what's been happening outside of all the developing of the new material and the events with the Draw Your Sword side of things and the Universal Declaration of Independence. It's been absolutely dismal, to be honest. If everybody who's read the Draw Your Sword and the Universal Declaration of Independence and Sovereignty, if you get your head and heart around it, it's pure, simple, natural whole here and now. And do you think there's many people on the planet who can get their head and heart around the simplicities of it? No. You know, there's so many political commentators, activists, you know, celebrities, everything like that, talking about the problem, which is fine. But like I said, it's all problem, reaction, solution orientated. And if the people doing the troubleshooting and the problem solving don't actually have an answer in mind, then it's a bottomless pit. You know, like, I'm very brutally honest with people about this. And if you think that there's any change happening within the people who are signing petitions, doing do not consent forms, educating people about the Illuminati, going down all those rabbit holes of conspiracies, if you think that's helping, you're sadly mistaken, because all our time and energy has to go towards creating a new paradigm, where the old paradigm is not worthy of a comment. I mean, it's the old paradigm. This is one of the reasons why I've never wanted to do the bottom-up material, is because it's not worthy of a comment, right? If you can't invest your time and energies consciously and deliberately towards living what I call the new you and creating a new paradigm for yourself and others, then it's just going to, all the energies are either going towards the old or the new. And nothing in the old paradigm is worthy of a comment. So there's no point going into the history of it, and, you know, going back into whether it's aliens or not. We have to work with what's here and now. And, you know, everybody means well. You know, I'm not being critical of everybody, but if the troubleshooters and the problem solvers did have an answer in mind and they all put their collective efforts into that, you know, I get people on a daily basis, you know, sending me messages, why don't you talk to this person? They're doing this and this person's doing that. It's like, those people aren't coming to me. And I look at what they're doing, and all they're doing is hyping people up around the problem and pointing out possible solutions. But I've spoken to a lot of people who are frontline activists and you know, political commentators and everything, and beneath their, you know, bravo, you know, charismatic personalities, they're just as despaired as everybody else, because, you know, they've sat there and said to me, well, what are we going to do, brother? What are we going to do? How can we help? It's like, why ask me? You know, the answer's been sitting there the whole time, but I don't know how to get people to be able to identify the answer, which is part of what we're going to cover today. They're so blinded by their underlying emotions that they can't see what's in front of them. And they're still trying to make sense of things that have been deliberately created to confuse us. And this is part of why the emotions are so toxic, because as soon as you start examining them, they instantly open up a bottomless pit. And how much time and energy we need to put into that? Now, I don't think we need to put any time and energy into it at all. Once we know and understand the nature and origins of our outward going thoughts and the true nature of our emotions, we can instantly take the energy that we've had draining away into our emotional states. We can retrieve that and send it back into our natural state and access the nature of the flow. So I haven't bothered doing any more with the Universal Declaration of Independence and Sovereignty and the Draw Your Sword, but mainly because I've been too busy. And with this whole lockdown thing, you know, I'm making hay while the sun shines in terms of getting the books produced. I've thankfully finished my second book. It's called Inward Bound, a collection of short stories. It's not like the first textbook. This is like more like I'll use Celestine prophecies, Anastasia type series of stories. I don't want to give too much away, but I've had some people proofread it and they said it's profound. So that's good. I've been wanting to get the Adata meditation book finished, but I haven't been able to do that. So maybe when I get back from this next tour. So yeah, so I've been busy writing. So I don't have the time and energy to debate people about, you know, whether what this high profile commentators talking about is relevant to what I'm sharing or not. It's, to be honest, I haven't found anybody who's ready, willing, and able to get their head and heart around the nobody of any notoriety, no high profile people, no one of any consequences being able to access it and run with it, which again bamboozles me. But the people say to me, why is that happening? I was like, well, do you want me to explain it in 600 pages or less? My whole book, The Nature of Life, explains exactly how and why we are in this situation. But it's the people who have got their head and heart around the nature of life. They are the ones that need to, when asked, to serve others to live the truth. Right. So I met a guy yesterday, fantastic guy, super nice bloke. He said something, and I said, well, you do realise the whole scamdemic's a hoax, don't you? And he said, well, I'm skeptical. I said, if you want to shut someone up about going on about the COVID-19 crap, and the fact that they're even calling it COVID-19 instead of coronavirus is all part of the thing. Like COVID-19 stands for Certificate of Vaccination 2019, which is when Bill Gates and his mates pushed the agenda through. Calling the coronavirus COVID-19 is like calling, I don't know, I can't think of a good example. It's like calling Jesus the Bible, something stupid like that, or it's called like calling Holden cars the factory, it's the product of something else, So anyway, so so I'm not going to be bothered talking any more about that side of things. I just literally, my brain just switches off talking about it now. So so that's what I was going to say. Yeah, if you want to shut someone up, I say to people, like, I will bet you Bill Gates is worth that the whole thing's a scam, right? I 100% guarantee it's a scam, and I'll bet you everything that Bill Gates has got on it, yeah? And I would challenge Bill Gates to that, I'll bet everything he's worth that what he's doing is a complete scam, a complete hoax, yeah? So anyway, that's enough of that. The draw your sword thing, the Universal Declaration of Independence and Sovereignty, that will probably just find its own way around. Some people have absolutely taken it to heart and printed copies off and shared it, which is great. But again, it's all about reaching the tipping point and the dominant force. People are looking at it, but I don't think people understand the simplicities of the what, when, how, where, why, and who component, like the 36 points. Those 36 points cover every single factor. So there's no loopholes, like everyone's trying to find within the legal system, and it's all just, it's all just people trying to take advantage of others. When you've got those basic 36 points, which then expand out to another 7, each of those 36 points expand out to another, say, 72 points, depending on how you look at it. There's no loopholes, right? So that's the beauty of it, the simplicity of it, and how it's just like it's whole and complete within itself. It doesn't need to get any more complicated than that. And like I had somebody just go completely psycho at me recently. And they've always been a narcissist, and I've always accommodated them. But when they start badgering me with quotes from the Bible and saying that, this is all the way that, you have to do all the sovereignty thing based on biblical terms, and that's all just bullshit, that it's, I was brutally honest with this person, and I said to her that, the Bible, I don't personally think the Bible is relevant. I think it was written by the Illuminati, and the story of Jesus was constructed compiled out of different personalities of other saints. And, we do not need anything or anyone else between us. I listened to another guy talking about a biblical term, and it was saying that you have to have somebody else validate who you are. It's like, who says? If I say I'm a divine sovereign being, I don't need anyone else's approval for that. I don't need anyone else's acceptance or validation. So there's people who are trying hard to free people but they're using something that was designed to enslave them to try and free themselves, right? It doesn't have to be beyond the here and now. We do not need to quote anybody who's not present. We don't need to recite or anything that was written outside of the now. And that's just how ridiculous it all is, you know? Like as soon as you start telling me that you have to know the what, when, how, where, why, and who of the Bible in relation to sovereignty, in relation to admiralty law, you know, in relation to common law, what I'm talking about is not even common law. It's just the purity of being here now. You know, you don't even need to know common law to be able to sign the Declaration of Independence and sovereignty. It's just, that's the degree of the trap that people are falling. Okay, so we're back? Yeah. Alrighty, so that's enough of that. So I've got a lot I want to cover tonight. So if there's any questions, I've got the chat open now, but Mark, if there's, I won't really look at them, otherwise I'll get distracted. But if there are any pressing questions on any particular topic, just put your hand up and ask Mark, and Mark will just screen it if it's worth the interruption. I do have a lot of information I want to share, and I will be sharing as much of it as I can. And the reason why is because, like I said, I want to get this off my chest and I don't want to have to talk about it again. So if I can get through the whole PowerPoint tonight, that'll be good. And, you know, a lot of people say to me, oh, you know, but your information's hard to understand or difficult to get my head around or whatever. Just watch it until you do understand it. Yeah, that's why I don't want to have to keep repeating myself, you know, and explaining it in different ways. You know, I think if you watch what I'm sharing, you know, enough times, you'll get the full picture. So I'm going to skip through it, and that means if you have to watch it 2 or even 10 times, then so be it, you know, but the information is going to be there, and I'm just going to cover it as much as I can. So anything else I've missed, Mark?
Not that I can think of, mate, and there's no questions in the chat box. So I think we're ready to roll and jump on into it.
All right, very good. So I've just got to work out how to do this again. Let's just share screen. All righty. So I've got about 89 PowerPoint slides, so we'll try and get through as much of it as we can. So, like I said, emotions is probably my least favorite topic for the reasons you're about to see. So with the problem with this is everybody's got a different perspective and approach to it. And like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, I think about since 1983, and I haven't found many people who have got a really logical approach to it all. You know, like I don't really like going into the emotions, because from my own experience, when I used to experiment on myself and that sort of thing when I was meditating in India, as soon as you go into the dualistic nature of the emotions, it's a bottomless pit. It literally is an abyss that you can just keep going into forever. And if you don't turn your energies back towards the truth, then, you know, you're literally wasting your time and energy. So that's what I want to sort of help everybody to understand tonight. So just so as you know, my company is called Spectrum, and we work under what's called the Forest Foundation. It's a not-for-profit charity foundation, and it sort of frees me from all the crap that most people deal with in terms of governments and taxes and that sort of stuff. So Spectrum is the hub, basically, that brings together all 12 different branches of what I do on behalf of Spectrum, or as Spectrum, I mean, as the foundation. And so we do a combination of things. And like Mark showed you before, that this is the Nature of Life book. It is the first, it was supposed to be the first of 21 books. It's now the middle of 23 books. So it's a 600-page textbook that explains the nature of life. What I'm sharing tonight is part of this book, just a little bit, but I'm just sort of expanding a lot in ways that I didn't have room for in here in the book. So the question is, who really knows the truth about emotions and how to transcend them? Well, the short answer from me personally is no one really, other than, you know, conscious spiritual beings, the masters I've spent time with. There's too much time and energy being put into things that don't matter, and that's what we're going to cover. So we can't really trust how we interpret things. If this works for me, sometimes it doesn't. How we hear and experience things is often different, right? So this is the audio track of what's called the Laurel and Yanny video. And if you listen to this,
Yanny, Yanny, Yanny.
So, oops, sorry, I've got a new mouse and it's playing up a bit. Part of the reason why I was late today. So depending on how you listen to that, you either hear Laurel or Yanny. I'll play it once more. And depending on what state you're in, depends on the frequencies that goes into your auditory processing or your hearing.
Yanny, 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 yeah.
So what it's actually showing is that we can't trust or rely on our senses, right? Some of you may be hearing Laurel, some of you may be hearing Yanny, some of you may be hearing something in between. But if we are hearing or perceiving something completely different to it from each other, then this is one of the reasons why people get so emotional reactive. It's like, but I clearly heard you say this, and then this person will say, no, I said this. And they'll argue about it. And because the person who was saying it was coming from one frequency, saying Yanny, and the other person only heard Laurel, then if that person's in a negative spin, they will take what that person said personally and seriously, and it will create a separation and division, which is never a good thing, right? But we have to understand that we are limited organisms at this point, and until we're free of all the imbalances that causes our frequencies to drop off into duality, then we can't really take things personally and seriously, and not accept the fact that there's going to be misunderstandings, right? I can be standing on stage going Yanny, Yanny, Yanny. People in the audience will be hearing me say Laurel, 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 going, who's this arrogant asshole, you know? The people who are hearing Yanny, they're going, this is the sweetest thing I've ever heard. It's the most powerful, brutally honest thing. Whereas, you know, this is one of the things that triggers people. But my question is, what's causing the state where people are getting triggered, right? Triggered. And then when the emotions are literally the result of something triggering someone. But why are they susceptible to being triggered? And the emotions are the reaction to that, right? So those almonds on the screen are not moving, right? So if we can't honor the fact that, again, what we see is just as unreliable as what we hear, then there's no case for you know, trusting what we think we saw or believe, or, you know, in the past. You know, it just completely removes any validity of our understanding of ourselves in the past, right? So this is another one that I share with people. These lines are an incomplete diagram, and this is essential to the metaphor or the analogy I'm going to be sharing all the way through. So if you can't see and identify exactly what those lines are, you'll be doing mental gymnastics looking at it going, well, I can't understand it. You might think it's somebody sitting in a chair or a floor plan or something, right? But once I explain exactly what these lines mean, I can change it in any shape or form, and you'll be able to instantly identify it for what it is, right? But until then, there's confusion, right? So everybody who's dealing with emotions is confused because they're not seeing what they're seeing or hearing or feeling, all the senses. Their senses are actually stopping them from being able to identify it for what it really is, right? So if I show you what this really is, that confusion will instantly be dissolved, and it will be replaced with awareness. This is what I'm saying. You're either aware of something or you're not. There's no degrees of awareness, right? So if I tell you this is the shadow of the capital letter F, it's obvious, right? Whereas if I take that away, right, you can see how it's actually a three-dimensional object. So, right, so when you look at the shadow of an F, the F's in my world are the equivalent of an emotion, right? It's the shadow of something that's there. So trying to interpret the shadows without understanding that there's another dimension from which the light's being cast, and there's an object in front of the light that's causing the shadows. To me, trying to understand the shadows and trying to interpret the shadows is just as pointless as trying to understand emotions. You have to understand what's in the way of the light, what's causing the shadows, right? So if you've got an F, shadow of an F, then that might be the grief. If you've got a shadow of the letter T, that might be another emotion, and so on, right? So trying to understand the shadows without understanding the dimensions from which things are coming from is pointless, right? So once you know it's an F, it's very hard to unsee that, right? So once you know and understand the nature of emotions with what I'm going to share tonight, hopefully it's going to be impossible for you to be able to look at emotions in the same way, right? So this is the perspective that I've got of emotions, right? I don't pay any attention to them at all. They're no different than a shadow on the wall. Trying to address emotions is like trying to scrub a shadow off the wall. One of the masters I spent time with said it's a complete waste of time. You have to understand what's casting the shadow. Addressing the shadow itself is completely illogical, right? So there's 6 components of information which we're going to cover tonight, just the usual ones: what, when, how, where, why, and who. I'm going to go through this in detail towards the end, but once I've got to set the whole model for you first, and then I'll explain it in detail, right? So when you look at the foundation of information, there's 30 arrows here. There's what, when, how, where, why, and who in relation to each other. So you've got what in relation to where, you've got where in relation to what, right? But when you expand that and you have 2 of these diagrams side by side, you've got what in relation to what, you've got where, when in relation to how, and so on. So that makes 36 different pieces of information. So you need 36 pieces of information. You've got to form any understanding. And all emotions are the result of a misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge based on what pieces of information is missing, or what pathways in our bodies misinterpreting what, or misinterpreting how. Actually, I'll explain it as I go. So each one of these 6 components is relating to one of the elements within wood fire. They call them 5 elements in Chinese and Ayurveda, but there's actually 8, right? So you've got what is wood, when is air, how is water, where is earth, why is ether, and who is fire, right? So if somebody misinterprets who all the time, and this comes out in things like Alzheimer's, when somebody's actually got pathways being knocked out around time, they'll have issues around time. Like I knew a guy who had the when, he would ask you, what time's your flight today? And you would say, 5:30 this afternoon. 5 minutes later, you'd say, what time's your flight this afternoon, right? And, other people, what's your name again? Who are you? So you can see which pathways are being affected, right? So if we've got weaknesses in our pathways to start with, then we're going to be susceptible to misinterpreting the information that's coming at us, whether it's through whatever sensory pathway. So again, the eyes are on the circuit of the liver, and the ears are on the same circuit as the kidneys, right? So the different organs and things like that we'll go into shortly as well. So there's an internal, external component to each one of these 36 things. So when you expand it out, you get the full, I'll just quickly do this. So you've got the internal, external, what, when, how, where, why, and who in relation to internal, external, what, when, how, where, why, and who. So that expands out to 144 pieces of information. So this is, again, a breakdown within the communication within and between ourselves and another person, is what is often either due to an emotion blocking a pathway, or something blocking the pathways, and there's an emotional charge around it, and or between somebody else. The emotions can be a secondary or tertiary problem, right? But they're never a primary problem, right? So I'll show that more of that later. So that's the information that's being communicated within yourself and between 2 people, right? So to get clear on something, you really need to understand all 144 pieces of information. But I'm going to explain how when there's what's the real cause of emotion is when there's a breakdown within the organs associated with the information. and the inability to either process the information coming from within yourself or the information coming from outside of yourself. Right? Somebody was telling me the other day they were reading my new book, as proofreading it, and they were reading the book, and then they knew they shouldn't have done it, but they had a bit of cheesecake. And after they did it, they couldn't read my book at all. Their mind was just completely scrambled. And I laughed because I did that experiment, you know, when I was younger on yogurt. And, you know, I was watching a documentary, and I was, you know, it's one of those ones you had to not miss a single word. And I watched it, and then I had some acidophilus yogurt just to see what happened. And like I had a, you know, short attention span shorter than a fish. I just had to rewind everything that it said. So this is where things are interfering within our pathways, and our reaction to that interference, internal or external interference, brings up an emotion. Okay, so those 144 pieces of information determines your level of knowledge on any topic, right? So when you actually relate this to emotions and ask any psychologist or any psychiatrist or any counselor, you ask them what their interpretations of emotions are, and it's actually really dismal, right? And this is where, until you understand what I've talked about in the past, the 18 origins of thoughts and the two natures of thoughts, the inward coming thoughts, outward going thoughts. Until you understand the nature and origins of thoughts, then it's impossible to understand emotions. It's just literally impossible. So that's why we need to shed light on all this once and for all. So there's 144 potential issues. So this is where, if you've got an emotion, it'll be around one of these issues, right? And most people have got a cocktail of emotions going on in their heads, right? So what happens is that they've got primary emotions, then they've got secondary emotions. So they've got combinations of all this, and I'll show you how it sort of all goes on forever. How, like, it might be in relation to an internal what, in relation to external what, in relation to external who, in relation to internal how. And this is what the whole story is constructed of. This person did this to me back 15 years ago, and I've never forgiven them, and as a result of this, I'm smoking 15 packets a day, and the whole story just explodes, yeah? So this is where if you go into the detail of it, you've got which, with, without, while, whether, into. I won't go into this. And then you put the whole diagram inside of itself, and this presents the story. This presents with the information, whatever it is that's going on in the mind or within the consciousness. Okay, so we can pinpoint it. So one of the masters got up me for being specific and not exact. You have to be able to know exactly what's going on when you're addressing an issue, right? We have to know exactly what's causing the blockage, right? What's casting the shadow. But so to be able to do that, we need to know where it's occurring. So where in a person's reality it is, the 6 elements of life are experience, expression, evolution, form, function, and flow. Is a person's emotion directed at a lack of an experience or a lack of expression or an evolution, form, function, or flow? What's it actually occurring around, right? And then we got the negative spin of that, which is the 6 elements of the existence, which is interaction, reaction, regression, construct, dysfunctional, malfunction, dysfunction for an organism, malfunction for an object or machine, and then you've got imbalance, right? So most people are stuck on the right-hand side, and as soon as you're not in the grace, this is what's lacking on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, that's what's in excess. As soon as there's a lack of or an excess, there's an emotion. Instantly, there's an emotion arise instantly with every imbalance, which is what I'll show you shortly. So there's an internal, external component of this as well, right? So you take the whole diagram within itself, and so it just goes on forever, right? So one is a habitual reaction, one is a conscious response. As soon as a person is not consciously responding, there's always going to be some residual emotional charge around what's happening. And we'll go more into that shortly. Right, so overall, these on the left and right, there's both 144 components to it. So on the right, most people are stuck in that reality and they're overwhelmed with emotions, right? Most people, to be in the flow state, to be in a state of grace, we need to be in the left-hand side, living a conscious reality and being whole and complete, all right? So when you look at it, these 12 aspects these 12 aspects of being are every single thing that influences your experience and your state of mind and your physical condition. Any imbalance in any of these 12 things is what's going to cause an emotion, right? And I'll show you exactly how all these are all interconnected. So these 12 things literally cover every single gross or subtle influence in your reality, whether it's Mercury in retrograde or living under a flight path with all the excessive noise pollution. Every single factor that in any way influences your reality is included in these 12 aspects, right? So everything that changes your experience. So when you position them into what's called a dodic angle, all 12 aspects are interconnected. So imagine this is a three-dimensional object, and if I disturb one of those spheres, it instantly impacts on everything else, right? So how it works is just basically there's 132 arrows on this page, right? So if you have a physical trauma, it may cause a change in your biochemistry, which then affects your mental emotional state, which then can affect your sociological behaviors and that sort of stuff, right? So if you get chemically poisoned, it may go straight to the biochemistry, affect your brain. That will overall affect your biological function, disconnect you from the spiritual side of aspects of life, and shut down your bioenergetics and bioelectrics, right? So it's all connected. So you can literally plot every single path of a disease or healing using this as a model, right? So when you look at it, there's all the laws, dynamics, and processes. And, so then in the middle is the common laws. So these got laws, dynamics, processes, and so in the middle is the laws. And each one of the 132 arrows has all 144 pieces of information. So if there's a breakdown in information within all the information going between the cells, then there's going to be an emotion straight up, right? So the holographic nature of it is that you take the whole dodic angle and put it inside itself. And what we've just done is created time and space within the model, right? So if you can look at chemicals, this is the chemical aspect, this is the environment. So you can see how there's chemicals in the environment and how that might be affecting your mental emotional state. Then there's chemicals within your dietary nutritional aspect, and you can see how that might be affecting your bioelectrics of your neurological pathways, right? So it gives infinite depth to understanding every component of what makes you you. And that's critical to know, right? So this is a typical condition of the state and condition of the average person. Instead of all the arrows being nice and central and focused, connected to the laws in the middle, right? They're all disease. All the energies are going outwards, and they're looking for external truths rather than being connected to the internal truth. So as soon as an arrow goes outside the basic model, there's a separation away from oneness and wholeness. And if those arrows intersect, it's a false reality. This is where if a woman thinks her husband's having an affair, her hormones might be blown out. And if they split off, then there's division. So this is when there's a complexity to the story, and the further that energy goes out, the more momentum there is, and more it speeds up. So this particular stage of the model, there's only about 66 lines there. That whole thing's contracting in a negative spin, whereas the other one is expanding in all directions in a positive spin, right? So this is all the different health conditions and mental states. So people are looking for the easy way out, outside of themselves, rather than finding the natural path of least resistance by going inwards. So the evolution is when all 12 aspects are balanced, this is the balanced state, all 12 aspects have to grow simultaneously. You can't have the physical aspect growing and the bioelectrical, bioenergetic one contracting. Right? So when they all grow, they all meet in the middle. And then when they meet in the middle and keep expanding, then they overlap into what's called a torus. So if you look at a donut cut in half, then as they overlap in the middle, it comes into the next level, and then that expands, and then it sort of mushrooms out from the top and then creates the next layer. So it's like it encompasses the whole experience of a person, right? So when you look at it, you start with the basic model, And the thing that causes balance is the three laws of balance of regulation, routine, and ritual. And when all 12 grow simultaneously, they meet in the middle, and then they overlap, and then out comes the next layer. And then that's nature, soul, and food. They encompass the whole thing, and they overlap in the middle to create love, light, and life. And it evolves all the way to emergence, right? So when this is our natural flow state, we're meant to be in this state. This is what we're all about. Life's all about is to grow into that, grow in that experience, and go lead ourselves to the ultimate state of emergence. All right. So if we're not on that path, then there's going to be an emotion. If we're not feeling it, and we're only wishing for it or yearning for it, if we're not actually feeling it, then there's an emotion, right? So that's a conscious response, right, when we're feeling it, right? So when we go back the other way and all these things are in a negative spin contracting, they go through all the stages of suffering all the way into oblivion. So as soon as there's an emotion, what happens is our mind brings up the worst case scenario, and I'll talk more about that in the neurological side of things, but we're actually expecting the worst, which is, in our personal reality, it's oblivion, right? Being crushed into, or obliterated into oblivion, right? And along the way, there's degrees of compensations and how we handle that. Some people just compensate, some people are forced to overcompensate, and when all the overcompensations collapse, then that's when we face oblivion. And this is what's happening with when people suicide and things like that, is that they don't have any options left because all the pathways have broken down and they don't have enough pathways left to recover, right? So the only option is the suicide, right? So that's actually the maximum, like that's about as bad as the emotional state can get, right? So for an individual anyway, it's worse when a person's stuck in that state and that's projected onto others, and that's when you have all the domestic violence and war and psychopathy and, you know, CEOs of companies and so on. So that's all habitual reaction. When people are in that state, they just want to do things habitually because that's the easy way. They don't have to think. They just put responsibility onto the governments and whoever else, and that takes all the effort out of it for them, right? So the evolution is your lowest point and your highest point are both somewhere on this scale. This is your experience, right? So a person's lowest point might be diseased, and their highest vibrational state might be enlightenment, and their average experience might be harmonious. Somebody's highest state might be imbalance, their lowest state might be overcompensations, and their average state might be disease. Right? So everybody you meet, everybody you talk to, their highest and lowest state and the average state's on that chart. So you have to have compassion for them. You know, you might be talking to some asshole on the phone, and his average experience might be suffering because his wife might have postnatal depression and so on, and he's not sleeping because he got a new baby and all that sort of stuff, and he might be fully overcompensating, and you might be getting him on a good day, right? So this is where there's no guilt, shame, and blame attached to any of this, right? Once you actually have a model, you can actually, it automatically gives you compassion, right? So when you look at it, there's the 6 causes of disease. I'll skip through this. You're either going towards balance or imbalance. And there's 6 causes of disease. You've got, actually, I'll just say there's, I'll start from deficiency. There's deficiency, deficit, depletion, and excess, overload, collapse. Right? So how they impact on your energies, they either break down, shut down, or over or under energize you. Right? Again, as soon as things start breaking down or over energizing, there's an emotional charge. Right? But when there's balance, everything, all the energy is flowing exactly where it needs to. There's no breakdown in communication. There's no excess or deficiencies anywhere. It's all just balanced. Yeah. So how this works is everything starts with an initial deficiency, which then causes an excess somewhere else, which causes a deficit somewhere else, which causes an overload somewhere else, a depletion somewhere else, a collapse, and then that results in death. Along the way, we compensate, overcompensate, self-destruct, and then decompensate. Right? So this is people like who have got anorexia and things like that. They're just decompensating. It's like a pixel. All the pixels of who they think they are, all the information that they've constructed around their identity is just breaking down, so they just self-destruct or they're just decompensating. Yeah? So the dominant force will always win in a person's reality. And those of you that know the material and have seen the other videos and blogs, it's always about the dominant force. If the dominant force is not in a person's favor, there'll be an emotional charge around it. Anybody who's got any emotional charge whatsoever, they don't feel the universe is on their side, right? Because in their mind, they've constructed an outcome, a scenario that isn't their ideal, which means they're not connecting to, I've talked about in the past, the ultimate and the inevitable, right? So if a person's not connecting to the ultimate and inevitable, they're in the dualistic paradigm, and there's always an emotional charge to it. It doesn't matter what, it goes without saying, because there's the shadow of what's blocking them from being able to see the ultimate and inevitable, either see, feel, or hear what's called the beckoning of their future higher self towards the ultimate. So to counteract that, the dynamics of growth, it has to start with true knowledge. That will create balance. That will help people diversify their life and experience more truth. And then that opens them up to understanding the law of synergy, which then helps them lead them on to the purification of their experience, which then helps them connect with all their internal and external guidance, which leads them on to immortality. Along the way, we connect with our skills, our talents, our gifts, our passions. Right? So that's what's missing in people's lives. So the whole Nature of Life book is all about being able to determine what's missing. What's that initial deficiency, right? And when you look at it all again, there's the 6 components of information. That's all knowledge. This degree of knowledge. What we're lacking here, everybody, is the true knowledge, right? So it's the lack of knowledge that's creating and perpetuating all this insanity, right? So if we know how to redirect all the energy that we've got projecting out as our emotions, if we know how to retrieve all that and then find something to focus them on, and then channel them into the direction of what we know is ultimately the best, not just for ourselves but everybody, all the problems will disappear, right? So it's the lack of true knowledge which is what's causing everybody to have these endless debates and conversations about the problems and solutions. If we have the true knowledge, the answer's obvious. The dualistic paradigm is not worthy of a comment. The truth goes without saying, and we can start living it here and now, right? The only reason why we have an emotion is because we don't know how to be here and now. If we're whole and complete in the here and now, there's no residue of the past feeding into a story in our minds and in our cellular memories, which is projecting out as our thoughts, right? It's like I said, it's all the dominant force of what's going on within the nature and origins of your thoughts, right? So if we know how to align and connect with our inward coming thoughts, all emotions dissolve instantly, okay? So it's how you transcend them. It's all within the intuitive process, which I've talked about in the past, right? But that knowing how to do that is the true knowledge. Knowing how to maintain that's the highest knowledge, right? Maintaining growth. And then growth leads to transformation. That's the highest knowledge that you can have, right? Because it leads you towards that highest state of immortality, right? One guy said to me years ago about eternal youth and immortality. I said, well, it's all the same thing. Eternal youth is an expression of our immortal nature. It's eternal youth is finding the immortal spirit within our physical bodies, right? So essentially, it's they said it's not. He said it's not the same. I said, well, from my perspective, it is. All right. So if you want somebody to have eternal youth, you have to be connected to the immortal spirit. It just goes without saying. All right. So the 12 aspects, we're just going to quickly cover each of the 12 aspects, maybe not all of them, just in relation to emotions. Right. The spiritual aspect. Oh, I've dropped that in the wrong spot. Sorry. So just so as everybody knows, this is one of the charts I sell, and it looks like there's a lot, but I'll just quickly explain it. Are you able to see the arrow on the screen there, Mark?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay.
It lags a tiny bit, but yeah, it's yes, you can see it.
Yeah, this new mouse isn't as good as my last.
Oh, it's not the mouse; it's just the upload speed. Yeah, but that's fine.
Well, I move it and it takes a while for it to come up on my end as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So so the 12 aspects of being, waiting for it to come up. Oh, there it is. Okay, so the 12 aspects of being are your experience. The 12 facets are your expression. This is the diagram for aspects. This is the diagram for facets. Experience, expression. This is the collective experience and expression. The 12, the 12 sectors of community, or the 12 divisions of society. When we're in a conscious state, we're living as a community. When we're in a dualistic state, we're living as society. This is the diagram for the community. This is the diagram for society. We experience and express ourselves individually and collectively on all 9 levels of our being. In the absence of that alignment, where all our points are connected in the middle, we're living on the 9 levels of our ego. So these are the 9 levels of our being radiating from within, and these are the 9 levels of ego collapsing into, like, funneling our energies into oblivion. Right? I won't cover this part on the right. So what happens is this chart here, this is how we evolve in our experience and how we regress in our experience. This is how we evolve in our expression. This is how we regress in our expression. And this is how we individually evolve how we collectively evolve and collectively regress. Right? So when you take a dodec angle and put it on all 9 levels of being, then you end up with what's called the matrix of being. And when you take the holographic nature of each of those aspects, there's 6.5 quadrillion components or pathways within our being, right? When you look at the diseased one, there's no central point in the middle. So they all start wandering off, living out their own little world, in their own little worlds with their own agendas, and all the energies are going outwards. So there's no alignment and connection. So it's like a bit of a soup of energies, and they're all bouncing off each within themselves and between the levels. Whereas here, everything's communicating from the middle outwards, right? So we're all very aligned and centered and connected. Right? So when you have 2 people in this state, there's going to be conflict and confusion. Each person is already emotionally charged, and then you get 2 people clashing, and there's going to be it's going to add a depth to the charge, right? Whereas here, when every level's in harmony, and you get 2 people in this state together, and there's only going to be a resonance between them, right? So that's very important to remember, right? Our energies are either going one way or the other. We're either regressing or evolving. If we're regressing, right, then we're slipping into this state, right? So what I'm going to talk about in the hole-in-one is the psychology of what's going on in a person in both what I call the template of the ego and the egoic state and the conscious state within the matrix of being. I've got that down to an absolute nth degree where you can tell exactly what a person's thoughts are and what timeline they're going on. When they talk about, I could have done this, I should have done that. I've actually mapped the whole thing into a very simple and easier to understand model. So it's going to be a blast sharing all that. So anyway, so the 12 divine elements in terms of the spiritual aspect, this is what people awaken to or surrender to, right? So the main component within all this that is causing most people's emotions is that they haven't surrendered to the divine will, or they haven't awakened to it. As soon as somebody still believes in free will, they're going to be full of emotions, right? Because there's going to be all the emotional charge around having to put the effort into creating their own reality or something, right? So if they haven't merged with the will of the breath and the heartbeat and all the forces within creation, and if they're somehow again separate from that, like I said, when the energies are going outwards, they appear to be separate, right? As soon as the energies go outwards, they appear very real, but none of it's true, right? That's what people mistake. Right? It's very real when somebody's emotions are blown out or hormones are blown out and they're going off at somebody. That's very real to them. But is it true? Not at all, right? So the other main component within all this that I've noticed traveling around the world and studying people, human behaviors, is that it's the divine purpose, right? When we're disconnected from that divine purpose, there's no connection, there's no sense of why. This is why when you travel the world, all the little toddlers are going, yeah, but why? Why? It's not how, it's not who, it's not where, it's why. Right? So when we're disconnected from purpose, our mind has to reason. And if we aren't interpreting the information correctly within our senses, like the laurel and the Annie, or the F in the sentence, or the moving almonds, if we're not interpreting it correctly, our reasons for reacting become justified, right? Rather than just being able to accept it for what it is and not have it influence us, because we've got a connection within ourselves. When we're fully aligned and connected within ourselves, we're in the flow of these 12 divine elements at work within every cell of our body, within every thought, word, and deed, right? And there's no question of why. But when you're separate from that, there's a reason for everything, you know? So the ego constructs a reason and a justification and the excuse for everything. And as soon as there's no connection, again, there's a shadow of an emotion, right? So that's the spiritual aspect. So now within the physical aspect, any trauma is obviously, it can be upset for anybody, but the posture is really important. How this goes into, it all overlaps, like I've said, like there's a neurological component to all this. So when you're not sitting straight and all the bioelectrics and the bioenergetics of the energies going up and down your spine, when that's not integrated or developed or integrated, then you end up, if you're slumping, that really reflects in your mental emotional state, right? You can tell a person's mental emotional state by their posture, right? So there's a lady by the name of Esther Gokal, and she's got this technique called primal posture. I suggest everybody look into it. If you don't have correct posture, then it will reflect in your mental emotional state. And again, it's very black and white. You know, I explained this in all the data meditation, how important it is to keep the spine straight. But when you look at the neurological component, a lot of the primitive reflexes are spinal reflexes. And this is what causes the things like scoliosis and things like that. So when a person's not developed like neurologically past infant level, it's impossible for them to sit up and stand and walk properly anyway. They're doing it all on their compensations. So this is one of the reasons why metaphysically your spine is your ability to support yourself, right? And if the information going up and down your spine and away from your spine, if that's not sending the right information, then again, there's going to be an emotional charge around what's missing, right? There's always a sense of what's missing. So I won't spend much time on each one. So chemical toxicity. Chemicals, obviously everybody knows how toxic chemicals are, but the biggest factor is the medication that people are on. And if people think that, you know, all my explanations of food, like the energies and properties of food, a bit out there, then how big is an antidepressant, or how big does a LSD, you know, thing of LSD have to be? A very small amount of chemicals can have a profound effect on your whole experience of consciousness, right? How big does, you know, how you only need 5 grams of magic mushrooms to have an experience, right? So it's not so much the volume, it's the intensity of the chemical reactions that affects the whole body. Most people are so chemically disturbed from cigarette smoke and chemtrails and car pollution, all that sort of stuff. It's almost impossible for them to stay balanced within the mental emotional aspect, right? And that's why they resort to chemical drugs and things like that to help redirect the energy away from whatever they perceive the cause of the pain is, or confusion. So it's the pin that pops the balloon. You know, only small amount of chemicals, like somebody might just wear a bit of the wrong makeup and poison their whole system, or they breathe in their partner's perfumes. These are the things that keep triggering people, right? If you have an endocrine disruptive chemical in a perfume, then you're going to be an emotional basket case, right? It's all the science is there to prove all that, yeah? So vaccination ingredients, if you haven't looked at the list, it's one of the biggest effects. You know, I don't think I've got aborted fetuses there, but anyway. And another one is the chemicals, how it changes all our gender orientations. The US military developed a gay bomb that if they released it on the enemies, it would turn them insatiably homosexual. That's what the description off the website. If you don't know and understand about how chemicals can disturb everything to do with our gender orientation, please look at the documentary. It's called Toxic Baby. A lot of the you know, gays and gay rights people and everything like that, there's a lot of animosity towards people who are rejecting gays. Like from my perspective, homosexuality, any sexual things, is the result of an imbalance within the dodeca angle. Yes, it's all very real to them. Their gender orientation is very real. But is it true? No. Right? So when you look at all the science and everything like that presented in all the papers in the Toxic Baby documentary as well, there's so much evidence proving what I'm saying, right? So you can't, I've never had anybody that I've explained all this to in that whole gay movement, all that sexual orientation thing, come back at me once they've actually looked at this information and actually had anything further to say, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying there has to be a reason why it's happening, right? And again, so many people are so emotionally charged around their sexuality. It's like, who gives a shit what sexuality you got? Are you a conscious person? Are you at peace within yourself? That's all that matters. I don't need to know your sexuality. Just tell me if you're at peace and let me know what I can do to help you be at peace. But don't identify with your sexuality, because your sexuality can change just by an exposure to a chemical, right? If you're identifying with your sexuality, you're not conscious. You're just an intelligent animal that's being triggered by chemical reactions or biochemical reactions. Yeah. So MSG, just that this is a chemical in a food, right? You can see all the there's a description there of how it affects the whole body, right? So biologically, most people have got a whole spectrum of fungus, yeast, mold, parasites, worms, viruses, virons, that sort of stuff in their body, right? And they all affect the whole being, like everything affects everything through all 132 pathways on each level and through the whole 6.5 quadrillion connections. So this is out of homeopathy, how tuberculosis affects the whole being, mind, head, ears, everything, right? So if we're exposed to one little bug, that little bug can be the pin that pops our balloon, right? How big does a little golden staph infection have to be to cause a severe reaction in someone, right? It's all the dominant force. So there's an area within the iris off the transverse colon near the hepatic flexure that goes into the physiological part of the brain, which is the sex, impulse, perversion, hallucination area. This is where I treat an enormous number of people with sex addictions, rapists, murderers, pedophiles, child molesters, that sort of thing. And they've all got bugs in their gut. If they've got a bug in this gut, on this side of their gut, underneath the liver, then it creates some sort of sexual perversion. On the left side, it gives them diabetes and obsessive compulsive disorder. Same bug, different location in the body, right? Again, every bug creates an emotional reaction, creates an imbalance, yeah? So this is another important, the neurological part of it. Each aspect, each vertebra, with all the nerves coming out of each vertebra, nourishes the different organs. Like I said before, all the different organs within Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, are the seat of emotions. Like somebody goes, I'm feeling very liverish, right? They're angry, and so there's all these terms about how the organ's making them feel. Like I'm heartbroken, or I'm feeling very disheartened, or that person really galls me, right? So they're talking about the emotions coming from the disturbance within the organ, right? So if their body was functioning completely, those organs wouldn't be disturbed and the emotions wouldn't come up, right? This is to give you an idea. If you're listening to a song and you absolutely love it and you play it and play it and play it, then one day you might be listening to it and may really irritate you, right? What's changed from the day when you loved it? There's a change in your biochemistry. There's a change in your frequency through the ears, right? I showed with the Laurel and Yanny, right? So if something's persisting and you're in a state where you're not actually open to that experience, then you'll have an emotional reaction, yeah? So this is something that chiropractic and osteopathy and a lot of other modalities are based on, myopractic, right? So from that, there's also the dermatomes. It's how if you've got an area on your skin where there's a problem, you can trace it back to a vertebra. So this is where, if you've got an irritation in your body, again, there's going to be an emotion, right? So when I lived for years with severe pain from spinal injuries, and I know that I used to get really quite irritable. I just had to, when I was in pain, I just needed to be left alone, right? I just didn't want any extra distractions or any extra burdens put on me. It was really quite horrible, right? So anybody who lives with chronic pain, that there's an emotion around it. right? In the same way with chemicals and addictions, you know, how, this is what I say to people, you know, if you look at the Dodic angle, who are you when you're tired? Who are you when you're hungry, when you get hangry, right? Who are you when you're thirsty? Who are you when you're hot, right? So each one of these personalities comes up when there's a disturbance within your internal reality or external environment. But who are you when you're tired, sleepy, hungry, and hot, right? So there's a compounding effect on, you know, the emotions, the charge in the emotion, right? So this is where this is playing out in your body. So this is how structurally, you know, if you're constantly being exposed to some emotion, it can affect your spine. But if you've got a problem with your spine, you're going to be susceptible to that external influence. Right? It goes both ways. All right. So within the mental emotional aspect now, this is what we're getting more into. Right? The 18 origins of thoughts, I won't go into that, but please study that through the blogs and the videos I've done on it. Until everybody knows and understands the exact nature of not just this chart, but this chart here, where we're going to be doing mental gymnastics, talking about things that don't matter, right? So here on the right side column, I give typical examples and influences of each origins of thoughts. There's a positive, negative, and divine component to those green ones. Please know and understand all that. So the sooner we can get on with living our lives where all that goes without saying, the sooner I can get back to the beach in India. Right. So now the 3 core emotions. This is what the whole thing's all about, right? There's 3 core emotions. There's grief, terror, and rage. This is not an oversimplification of it, but things happen. There's trinities and triads within all the material I share. All emotions are a combination or a variation within these 3 core emotions, right? The core emotions are, if you look at this one here, grief, it's when you're sad, despondent, unhappy, gloomy, miserable, dejected, or disillusioned, right? Terror, fearful, worried, anxious, apprehensive, concerned, phobic, scared, horrified, shocked, panicked, frightened, dread, alarmed, intrepid, right? And rage is anger, angry, furious, ferocity, vehement, wrathful, annoyed, or irritated. So they're the 3 core emotions, right? Not everybody's going to agree with this, but that's okay, right? So these are the primary emotions. It's like it's the primary colors, right? So there's variations, and when they mix together, it creates all other emotions. So when you look at it, emotions don't ever occur just by themselves, right? You might get what, but the component of what is never just by itself. It's always with when, how, where, why, or who. So there's more to it. There's always a relationship between something. Right, so there's 9 core emotional complexes. Right, so there's sad about being scared. So there's grief in relation to grief, terror in relation to terror, and so on. So there's altogether the 9 are. I just realised there's a bit of an error there, but there's so there's 9 emotions. So these things are not just ending with the 9, right? So when I was young and stupid, I used to be really, really good at being angry, right? But it didn't just stop there. I was angry at being angry because I was so scared that my grief would not shift, right? I was suicidal, and I was actually scared that I wouldn't be able to snap out of the grief, right? So this is where there's an emotional complex, but it does keep going on forever, right? And you can trace it all the way back to your ancestral traumas and things like that if you want. That's what I'm saying. It just goes back forever. But if you could just arrest all that energy, redirect it towards something that's empowering, that's true, then boom, right? We don't have to be going into the whole story of it all, right? So when you look at it, all emotions, they are directed at the perceived cause of the sense of. Remember, this is the sense of, right? Our senses are telling us what's real, but they don't always perceive the truth, right? So our sense of doubt, judgment, or question, or our sense of guilt, shame, or blame, or our feeling of unworthiness or undeservedness, or our sense of being inferior or lacking, whatever's causing our lack of superiority, right? It's all the energies always being directed at something, somewhere, where, somewhen, somewhere, how, and that sort of stuff. It's never just sitting there stagnant. It's always, because there's a charge, it's always directed at something, right? And this is what you have to understand, is that if we redirect that energy towards something that's empowering, we don't have to worry about the emotions, right? We don't have to scrub the shadow off the wall. So neurologically speaking, I'll just quickly touch on this. Our ability to navigate our way through life is determined by our ability to navigate our way within consciousness, right? And when you look at it, and when I've studied all this to the nth degree, how we navigate our way through time and space is how the vestibular system, which is the balance mechanism within each side of the inner ear, how it talks within itself and between itself, right? And I've mapped every person's personalities and strengths and weaknesses based on what the vestibular system can and can't do in response to internal or external stimulation, right? This is, I'm going to write a whole book about all this one day, to the point where I can get a person to do a neurological test. I can tell you everything about that person, what they can and can't do. I tested somebody recently, and they made a mistake at one particular point. I said, that means that you have got no sense of time, you have issues around time. And she looked at me with a blank face and she goes, Brian, I've got no sense of time. I have just got no sense. It's like I showed her the neurological basis of what pathways didn't develop in her. And time is in relation to the lung and large intestine energies, right? So it's the when component, the air component, which is lung and large intestine. So there's a problem within and between the lung and large intestine in relation to the rest of the body. But the problem could have started in utero when her balance mechanism didn't develop properly, which stopped the communication within her body, right? So the more people understand that we're limited in our reality by how well the vestibular system works. This is what my whole brain exercise program is. Not just the cranial brain. There's a cranial brain, heart brain, stomach brain, large intestinal brain, genital brain, and skin brain. Communication within and between all those brains, right? It's governed by the vestibular system, right? So that is how our consciousness and primarily the heart brain, the hormones and the neurons within the heart. This is getting to what's missing. Our ability to develop and integrate within the vestibular system then coordinates with the rest of the brains. That's the breakdown that's causing all the lights to go out, and in the darkness there's all the emotions, right? We're trying to interpret all the darkness because the light within our communication systems aren't working, right? That's the real basis of emotions right there. Right, so that's the internal ear. There's 3 semicircular canals, and there's 2 sacs, the utricle and the saccule. Right, so that's how there's little waxy substances on the tops of these hairs when you're going up and down. Right, so that's all to do with our ability to navigate with the top-down, bottom-up perspective. Right, so if somebody doesn't integrate within the vestibular system, then it's very hard for them to change direction. This is why people get car sick and they're very stubborn and they can't change their points of view, because they literally can't turn their head, right? They can't change their perspective. It's actually a neurological basis of why people are so stubborn and so limited in what they're willing to look at and learn, right? So again, this is another reason why our posture is so important. If our postural reflexes don't develop and integrate, and we have poor posture, it puts strain or over-energizes or shuts down parts of the vestibular system. And another thing is the vestibular system's connected to the 6 muscles in the eyes. And again, you know, people say, but can't you see it from my point of view? The answer is usually no. They can't turn their eyes to see it from a different perspective, right? So they're stuck in, when I do eye tests on people, get them to track a pen or something, you can see how their eyes just jump and skip and hop. Right, so it's a bit like when the almonds are moving on the screen. They're seeing things that don't exist, or they completely don't see what does exist. It goes both ways again. So this is how, you know, when people have got brain injuries and things like that, it stops the eyes from working together, and it stops the left and right parts of themselves, like the male and female, being able to work in harmony. And they have, you know, all breakdowns within their personalities and compensations around that as well. So just compensations wise, if we can't go directly from point to point, here to here, we compensate and go around this way, and there's an emotional reaction. All our emotions are in response to not being able to go directly. We have to go this way, and there's an emotional charge around something. It's like there's a resistance, to that pathway, like in electricity, you have a resistance. An emotion is a resistance to a pathway that's being used for something that's not designed to do, right? Very few people can get their heads and hearts around that. I'll say it again. Emotions are a resistance within a pathway that's being used for something that it's not designed to do, right? So if we have the ability to go and address an emotion, like we might go to a psychologist, instead of having the reactions like all the sharp edges, it might smooth us out and we might actually be nice to people, right? But we won't be having a conscious divine connection to them because we're lacking the pathway directly between points. It may not be 100% accurate to start with, right? This is having a true connection. This is a compensatory pathways, and we can all be nice and sweet and positive and helpful on the compensatory pathways. But are we empowered within the conscious natural pathways? Probably not, right? So this is why this is the difference between helping people with our compensated reality and serving each other to live the truth within the natural pathways, right? So this is one of the reasons why all these people talking out about, you know, what needs to be done with this whole scamdemic is that they're compensating around their compensations, trying to stir up something because they're at breaking point within themselves, right? They're not actually going, oh, well, we just have to go and create a new paradigm to make the old one obsolete. They don't have the pathways to give them that opportunity. They don't have that as an option, right? So they have to keep fighting to hold on to what they've got, right? This is all part of why people are so emotionally overwhelmed at the moment. And I'll skip all that bit. So if you look at how the brain, the sensory and the motor cortex of the brain, how the different volumes of the brain matter are allocated to the different organs and parts of the body, right? So you can see how the face, the lips, the hands, both the motor and the sensory are pretty similar. When you construct a little character made up out of that in proportion, you end up with what's called a homunculus, right? So this means, essentially, keep your hands busy doing what you love, right? Smile and keep your tongue still, right? And that will then itself redirect all the energy away from what's causing your emotions, right? If you keep your hands busy doing what you love, keep a smile on your face, stop taking things personally and seriously, and keep your tongue still unless you're actually asked to talk, right? All talking is what's feeding into the emotional charge, is what you're saying in yourself, right? As well, the internal dialogue. But that's your new best little friend, right? That's obviously the male version of it. So this is another reason why I get people to do the number 6 with their finger and the clockwise circle with the same foot, right? If they can't do that, they can't self-correct, right? And the inability to self-correct, right? And if they can't self-correct, chances are them being open to being corrected from somebody else is minimal, right? If somebody can't do it and their foot keeps going anti-clockwise or they go all scrambled, there's no point yelling at them. It's not going to help, right? So if they can't self-correct, then it means they don't have the pathways to do it, right? And that's when people say to me, yeah, I know I shouldn't do that, but I can't stop myself, or I know I should be doing that, but I can't bring myself to do it. So it's a lack of empowerment, right? So whenever there's an inability to respond appropriately in each given moment, instead of just habitually reacting, again, there's an emotional charge. If you break life down into little increments where you're just having to respond to each moment as it comes up, then there's no residue of the past. If you're empowered, then whatever's happened in the 5 seconds ago, or even 2 seconds ago, or 1 second ago, is irrelevant to what's happening now and what's coming to you. Right? If your energies aren't focused forward, and if there's any energies backwards, looking backwards, there's going to be a residue holding you back and stopping you from being able to move forward as well. Being held back is not the same as being stopped from going forwards. It's a two-way force. But if all your energies are focused on forwards, it's like a magnet. All the energies focusing in one direction. You'll be connected to your future higher self. You'll hear the beckoning and you'll be drawn into it. Right? So there won't be any excuses or any exceptions or exclusions on that. Right? So then, so I just realized it's already 9 o'clock. All right, so bioelectrically, bioenergetically, this is where being vaccinated, having all these chemicals injected into our bodies can disturb our meridians. And if you have scars or anything like that, especially tattoos. Tattoos are one of the worst things imaginable for disturbing your energies. takes you out of flow state altogether. So bioelectrically, bioenergetically, you shut down. So if you've got a bioelectrical current flowing through your body, the energy field around that is your aura, right? So the collection of your auras then feeds into your chakras, and then your chakras is how you energetically connect with others, right? So that's just a very simple explanation. If you're open to influencing the world, in proportion to that, you're open to being influenced by the world, right? So if you're not minding your own business, getting on with doing what you're here to do, then if you've got energy being projected outwards, in proportion to that, the energy can come inwards and influence you, right? It's not what life's about. You have to just mind your own business and get on with it. And that way you're no longer open to influence. As soon as you're influenced, then you know, all the guilt, shame and blame, doubt, judgment and question kicks in. Right, so this is something I share in the book as well. This is going back to the organ relationships. On the left side of each column, you've got the normal function. On the right side, you've got the dysfunctional state. Every mental and emotional state that you can imagine is on this chart. So if somebody says to me that they're got a partner who's hypercritical, I know they've got a problem with their large intestine. If somebody's got a phobia, chances are they've got the problem with their kidneys. Right? If somebody's really good at concentrating, chances are they've got strong kidneys. Somebody who's, oops, so I said my little mouse is not good. So if somebody's got a lot of motivation and a lot of forbearance, then you know their gallbladder's balanced, right? So again, you can't look at the emotions without looking at where's the disturbance coming from, right? So you can look at that and map where your organ strengths and weaknesses are coming from, right? What you inherited, what you acquired, so on, right? So just a quick look at the sociological part of it. You know, one of the worst things that's happened to the psyche of humanity is social media and all the impact that that's had. So all what Richard Grannon talks about, all the narcissism and all the mental health issues. Social media is just a disaster. And biochemically, you've got the 6 levels of communication. You've got lymph, blood, nerves, bioelectrics, bioenergetic, quantum. So every cell in your body is communicating through these 6 levels, which are holographic. So you've got all 6 within the 6. There's 36 levels of communication. Somebody's asked me to talk about how this is the blood chemistry. Somebody's had a termination and a pregnancy termination, and their hormones are blown out. It's a bottomless pit trying to address the hormones through bioelectrics, bioenergetic and quantum level if your lymph, blood and nerves are still disturbed from the operation, right? So obviously the primary thing that I talk about with everybody is that you must be breathing properly. Remember, the diaphragm is what pumps the lymphatic system. If you are not breathing below the navel, you're not changing all the bioelectrics, bioenergetics by activating all the muscles below the navel in the dantian. It's not firing up your high levels of communication. And if it's not doing that, the bioelectrics, bioenergetic and quantum of the lymph, blood and nerves stay switched off. And that story will keep running until you put a smile on your face, take a big deep breath below the navel, and do that with every breath and every heartbeat, which is where we're going. Yeah. So, so the main thing is if you're not breathing below the navel, you're in a mental state. If you are breathing below the navel, you're in a conscious state. You're in a dualistic state or a conscious state. So the dominant force has to be the mindfulness of the breath and directing it below the navel with every breath. Obviously, the reproductive organs are below the navel. So the more you do the abdominal breathing, it's going to massage and increase all the circulation, not just of all the physical things like lymph and blood, but you're also going to get more activation through the bioelectrics, bioenergetic and quantum level. All right. And the other thing is it's a root chakra thing. So you've got to eat as many different red foods as you can. And obviously it's going to be affecting the lower chakras as well. So orange and yellow food as well. And then you've got the white ones as well. All the onions and cauliflowers and cabbages and that sort of stuff. They're very high in sulfur. It'll minimize all the infections and help eliminations of all the pus or anything like that that comes from the operation as well. So sorry I didn't get a chance to call you back. I've been a tad busy. So breathing, diet, exercise and lifestyle, all the impact on these 6 levels of communication. If there's a disturbance within the 6 levels of communication, instantly there's an emotional reaction again. Yeah. So, so the social media side of things, it's creating a dopamine addiction, right? So the dopamine is what keeps people in a dualistic state. The serotonin is what keeps people in a state of consciousness, right? It's adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? So this is where those two things are severely causing an emotional addiction to the social media. Everyone's getting the dopamine hits, but they don't know how to get the flow of serotonin. It's a big problem. Right? So the conscious and dualistic state, just explain this quickly. The conscious state is stillness, emptiness, silence, solitude, ignorance, openness, and nature. The dualistic state is haste, overwhelmed, full, talk, noise, society, individuality, open, outwardness, external, obstructed, closed, and nature of mind. Right? I won't go into detail on this, but the main thing you have to realize here is the number one thing that disturbs everybody the most is rushing. Right? I deal with an extreme number of practitioners, and there are a lot of very pretentious people. This one person recently just could not accept that rushing was so bad and how it was just collapsing all their energies. Right? So as soon as you rush, it changes everything, and it pushes all your energies back into a dualistic state, brings up all your parents-child's issues and victims of society's issues. Right. So number one thing, if you're emotionally out of balance, you need to stay in a state of grace, which I'll get to shortly in terms of just being mindful of the breath. You can do things quickly and efficiently, but don't ever rush. Right. So there's an internal, external component of that as well. So this is the whole model. I'm just getting to the juicy bit now. This is a dualistic and conscious paradigm. So this maps the whole thing of what we're experiencing, right? But I want to get into a particular part of it. It's called the dynamics of spirit, which is how all this plays out. And the things I want to focus on the most is what I call the seeds of love, light, and life, and the roots of pain, confusion, and exhaustion. I'll just quickly go through this, right? So you've got the experience, expression, evolution, form, function, and flow, and then you've got the conscious experience and expression here. So there's internal, external component of that. So there's 18 seeds of love, light, and life. On the flip side, you've got interaction, reaction, regression, constructs, dysfunction, malfunction, imbalance, dualistic experience, expression, and you've got the state and condition. Here is the knowing. So if there's a lack of love, there's a lack of knowing when and where. The lack of light is lacking the who and why, and the life is what and how. Right, so if I asked you, if you stood before the divine, you could ask any question, what would your question be? Someone might say how, then you know that their essence of life is weak, right? If they want to know, then if they want to know who, then you know it's light. Right, so how it works is if you're lacking number 6 in light, you'll have number 6 as in confusion. So in the absence of love, you've got pain. In the absence of light, you've got confusion. In the absence of life, you've got exhaustion. Right, I go into detail all this in the book. So literally you're looking at the deficiency. This is what's naturally there, and this is what occurs in the deficiency of it, right? When you go back one, when you're stuck in pain, confusion, exhaustion, you compensate into satisfaction, knowledge, and drive. When you're evolving in love, light, and life, you connect to the oneness, bliss, and immortality. This is all going back into the 12 states of being as well, right? So the thing I want to bring to everybody's attention is this, and this is what I find myself talking about on a daily basis. Grief, if you look at it, it's the feeling of absence. It's a feeling of lack of. Grief is what's missing. If you flip it inside out, the opposite energy is gratitude, right? All the energy that you've got going on in grief, if you turn it towards the beauty, goodness, and freedom, which instills a sense of gratitude and appreciation for the gift of life, your energies will flip from projecting outwards to experiencing inwardsness and then expanding outwards, right? So gratitude is the key, right? Grief is just simply for somebody who feels like they've missed out on something. There's a culture in North India that they're not allowed to shed a tear for somebody who dies because there's an attachment to that person. They're not celebrating their ability to go on to the next world, right? Whereas you've got other cultures like the Maldives, and they have wailings, you know? It's just miserable, right? So there's no celebration to the true nature of life. All the grief is just an absence of gratitude, right? So if you take all the energy that's being attached to the expectations of what's missing, and you turn all that energy around to what the person actually does have, right? So the thankfulness is thankful that what you don't have. Gratitude is having gratitude for what you do have, right? Grief is around what you don't have and what you have lost, right? Gratitude is what you do. So it's the same energy going in different directions, right? The other one is anger. Anger is just laughter turned inside out. You know, somebody says, oh, I've got to go to anger management classes. I just say, you've just lost your sense of humor and you're taking things personally. You go, yeah, that's right, mate, I have, yeah. It's like, well, you just got to keep smiling, yeah? So it sounds like it's an oversimplistic way of explaining it, but we've all got the same amount of energy. Something I act out is, you know, a little boy and he's sitting there and he goes, you know, my dad, he's a doctor and he's what's it over there? My friend Joey's got a dog, right? You might have seen children like that. So all the energy is just going everywhere involuntarily, right? This is what's going on in people's heads as well, but they've just learnt to control it because it's not socially acceptable to be behaving like that, right? So everyone's got the same amount of energy. Everyone's got the same capacity to develop intelligences. But if the energy can't find true expression, doesn't have the pathways to stay focused and concentrated on something, it's just going to keep ricocheting everywhere around, either involuntarily most of the time. If we can't redirect all that energy, right, you get all these children who are just out of control. And the parents will say, when they're doing something they love, they don't have a problem. Right? It's just people have taken their energy away from the things that they love and the things they love learning, which is what I talk about in the soul elements. Right, so in the absence of that flow state, there's all the grief, anger, and the rage, right? So fear is the lack of being able to celebrate life, right? Fear is contracting, celebration is opening, and it's the inability to just honor the 12 divine elements, right? The 12 divine elements that work in and through and around everything, right? So this is where that's not hard to understand, right? So the light's either on or it's off, right? If the light's off, the three emotions appear, right? And particularly anger comes up, right? If there's no love, then there's gratitude, right? So gratitude is love, laughter is light, and celebration and honor is seeds of life, right? So we're just looking at what's missing. We don't have to worry about the emotional state at all, right? Just how, like, if somebody says to me, oh, somebody died, and I say, well, how is that a good thing? And they get upset. And I say, no, just bear with me. How is that a good thing, right? So they're only looking at what they've lost. They're not looking at what that other person's gained. They've gone to heaven or whatever, the nirvana, right? So they're only looking at it from their perspective. They're only seeing the shadow of the F of life, and they've got ingratitude around it, right? So I had a friend say to me one time when they lost a baby, you know, where do you think our son is now? And I said, the same place he was before he was born. And they go, well, that's a profound way of looking at it. I've never thought of it that way before. It's like, are you ready, willing, and able to change your perspective? And then that will reflect in your approach. We have to change our perspective and approach to emotions. It's a complete waste of time how society is addressing it at the moment, right? We just have to bring back the love, light, and life, have the gratitude, the laughter, and the celebration and honor, create heaven on earth again. Yeah, that's what's missing, right? So just looking at all again, the what, when, how, where, why, and who, we're nearly done. The what. Emotions are the effect of an imbalance within the 12 aspects of an organism, right? The imbalance is due to either an excess or deficiency. All disease starts with a deficiency. Deficiencies mean there is a lack of wholeness and completeness. A lack of wholeness and completeness means the form cannot experience or express its natural state. Its natural state is to be in a pure creative flow within its own uniqueness. That's what's missing, yeah? In the absence of that, there's an emotion, right? The next one is when. Emotions arise in the instant there is an imbalance within the 12 aspects. The imbalance is usually the result of abuse, neglect, or trauma. And then they will remain until the imbalance is remedied directly. They can come from any point on a person's timeline, right? So if a person's traumatized in the ancestral trauma, or it could be something presently, like if you're sitting on a seat with a nail on it, you might be pretty pissed off. Right? Or you can be picking up on your future traumas, right? I get a lot of people pick up on stuff that is yet to happen intuitively, right? They can come on slowly or instantly depending on the intensity of the cause, and they can go slowly or quickly, instantly, depending on the intensity of the correction, right? So that's the timing around it, right? The how, emotions will remain until the dominant force in a form's reality return to purity. It's all about purification, like I said earlier, within the dynamics of growth. It's all about returning to purity. They will remain residual until the original deficiency is addressed. You cannot get rid of a problem until you put back what's missing, the original problem. They only fully heal once synergy enables the form to remain that maintained session, which is the stillness, emptiness, silence, solitude, inwardness, and openness in nature. Right? Until you have enough synergy to maintain that, there's always going to be residual emotions. There's another typo. According to the amount of nature, nurture, and nourish, they'll heal, right? They are caused and perpetuated by impurities on all levels of being. So it may not just be a physical one. I just had to deal with somebody who was, believe it or not, being attacked by alien entities. I deal with lots of different things. Aliens who are trying to help, but all they did was interfere, right? I deal with some weird and wonderful things. So the where. Emotions occur wherever the dominant force is acting on a being's matrix within all levels of being, right? They can originate from internal or external imbalances. The being needs to be in the most harmonious and supportive environment in order to better heal and stay there. They are directed at what is perceived to be the cause or the sense of the doubt, judgment, and correction. So this is where the energy is going. If you look at where the energy is going, if it's external, then that needs to be retrieved and directed internally as well, right? If it's focused on internally, you just need to redirect all that destructive energy towards something that's creative. All stress, all disease is just creative energy turning destructive. You've got to always remember that, all right? So the why, emotions arise because the dominant force was not supporting their growth. Growth is our natural state. We're either in the flow of expansion and growth or we're not, right? The inability to effectively address emotions is due to the lack of the pathways. When all the pathways start breaking down, if you get a bug in your gut, it will give you a craving for a particular food and aversions for other foods, which will kill it. I treated somebody and they said, "Oh my God, you know," I said, "You've got this parasite. You need to eat this. You need to eat coriander." And they go, "Oh my God, that's the one thing I can't eat." I said, "No, that's the one thing the bugs in your gut stop you from eating because it knows it will kill it, right?" So this is where there's an emotional attachments around food and everything. The lack of pathways means there is lack of development within and between the 81 intelligences and primarily intrapersonal intelligence. The lack of the 81 intelligence means is there's an overall lack of emotional intelligence, which means a complete compensatory ego and intellect appears, right? So there's a person and an intellect that establishes a reason for everything, not just the purpose. The ego attaches itself to the story of everything that's happening, right? The who is emotions only arise within people living in a dualistic state. Emotions cause and keep people in the dualistic state. They are only related to the compensated personality of the parent's child or the victim of society. It's never the soul, right? Souls don't have emotions. They always appear to be real to those living in a false reality, but they are never true. Right, so when you look at it in terms of the nested tori, if all your energies aren't on the leading edge, anything other than on the leading edge, there's going to be an emotional attachment. I've sort of talked about this in the paradigm shift and before. All the idea is to get all your energies to the leading edge. All points along the way are untapped potentials, right? If you've got a comet tail here, the lowest point, shrouded in darkness and all the emotions, you go through the emotions, and it's simply just the seed of the soul that didn't germinate, right? You don't have to pay attachment to the shrouding darkness. You just have to activate the light within the soul and get that element, that potential within the soul onto the leading edge. That's all emotions are, is untapped potentials. And often they're unable to be found because all the pathways are stopping people from being able to find it. So just to give you an idea, is the lack of building pathways. If a person wants to learn the piano, and they don't get denied that, they may end up in jail. But if they do, they may end up as a neurosurgeon, right? But if a person's been denied the piano 10 times, right, they'll end up in the dualistic paradigm. But if they become competent in it enough to become a neurosurgeon, right, they'll be fine, right? So I'll just skip that. So it's all about what's missing. So going back to the breath, like I always talk about, you've got the 4 phases of the breath. You hold the breath out, breathe in, hold the breath in, breathe out, hold the breath out, breathe in, right? Instead of the short, sharp breaths like most people are taking. So the most important thing you need to realize here is that if you breathe fully in, it gives you a deeper soul connection. If you breathe all the way out, it gives you a spiritual and divine connection. right? You have to realize that that's where people are missing the point. If they've got really short, shallow breaths, they're going to stay stuck in that bandwidth within the breath, which is going to keep them limited in their thought processes and in their consciousness. The more deeper you can breathe in and the more deeper you can breathe out, the more connected you are internally within the divine and within yourself on the soul level. If you're not aware of the breath, you're thinking, which means there's emotional charges going on. If you are aware of the breath, you're feeling, which is the divine qualities, which means you're feeling guided, you're feeling connected, you're feeling whole and complete. So if you're not aware of the breath, you're not going at the pace of grace, which means you're rushing. The more you rush, the more you end up losing that connection, which means the stronger the emotional charge, right? Whether it's grief, terror, or rage, right? So, so the way to actually counter it is you can stack the breath in to get it fully in, and you can also stack the breath out until it's fully out, right? So they're the breathing exercises you need to learn to do below the navel. That's how you redirect all the energy that's going on in all the emotional charges, like your cellular memories and programs associations. You have to direct all that energy into increasing the breath and in and increasing the breath out. That's where you direct the energy. If your energy has to go somewhere, you have to direct it towards the mindfulness of the breath and the phases of the breath. That's what the mind, that where you get a song stuck in your head, that's where the energy is meant to be going, on the phases of the breath, right? So when you breathe out and hold the breath out, you connect with the heartbeat, and that's all another level of information, like the next layer of the torus, where all the information is coming into your heartbeat, which is inspiration. The breath itself is the key to intuition. The inspiration is the heartbeat. So this is where it gives you a very strong connection to the spirit and the divine. And this is all to do with the divine component of the vagus nerve. When you're in a negative spin, the vagus nerve is the fear paralysis reflex, which keeps you paralyzed and not unable to move forward or unable to move on from the past. But when you go deep inwards, right, to the breath and the heartbeat, this is the breath and the heartbeat within you. It's not your breath and your heartbeat. You can't own it. You have to honor it, right? So when you do that, you honor all that consciously by deepening and slowing the breath. That sends all the right information through your vagus nerve, and that opens up a whole different level of consciousness within you, right? So when you go deep into it, it's all the cardiopulmonary system. This is what I explained in the Adata meditation. It's the connection between the heart and the lungs. Yeah. So what perpetuates individuality? Where does it all start and stop? You are what you eat. You are what you think. Sorry, you are what you think. You are what you eat. You are what you think while you eat. So this is where it all starts and stops. If you can't find that peaceful state within yourself before you eat and while you eat, you won't be able to do it any other time of the day. When you do what I call the ritual of eating, you sit there and you find this stillness, emptiness, and silence, the internal, external stillness, emptiness, and silence, solitude, inwardness, and openness. And that means you're open to inward coming thoughts. And when you've got the inward coming thoughts, all the emotions are transcended, right? If you can't do it while you eat, you won't be able to do it at any other time of the day. It's a law, right? It's a metaphysical law, right? So how do you do all this? It's called the path of peace. We're all looking for the purpose, right? But if we don't fulfill our potential, we won't be able to find the purpose. If we don't know how to maintain our natural state of balance, which is growth, then we won't be able to fulfill our potential. The only way we can fulfill our natural state and maintain growth within the balance and then growth, is purity. And that all leads us towards emergence. And if we're not sharing that experience consciously, then we're only just victims of society trying to fluff each other's pillows in the zoo, trying to make ourselves comfortable, right? This is where it's all or nothing. All our energies are going towards that experience, or they're not. Yeah. If they're not, well, then they're straying away from that, and then instantly the emotions arise as well. Okay. So that looks like it. That ended abruptly, didn't it? So it's very simple, right? You're either present, feeling connected through the intuitive process and the inspirations, the inward coming thoughts, or you're not. And if you're not, then the energy's got to go somewhere, and it'll find something to get emotionally reactive about. You've got to remember, the higher you breathe up in your body, the more emotional states you're in. Right? If you breathe below the navel, as soon as you go below the navel, you're beyond duality. If you're breathing above the navel, you're in the sympathetic, parasympathetic state, positive, negative, good, bad, male, female energies. When you breathe below the navel, you're a divine being, and you're in the flow of those 12 divine elements at work in, through, and around you at all times. Right, so that's how you transcend it. You just have to honor the forces that give you life, and not looking at the world and seeing all the injustices of what you're missing out on and what you could have and should have and would have had. Right, that's just your perceptions. Right, you have to change your perceptions back towards all the beauty, goodness, and the freedom of internally and externally what you do have. Right, and then your energies will keep expanding. Your energies are either expanding or contracting. All right. So I'll leave it on that note. Is there any questions or any other comments come up at all? Managed to get through all that, Mark?
Yeah, that was really good. It's funny, just some subtle changes in languages from the presenting the same material was really good from my perspective. So thank you for that. Star's gone to bed, but Terry's still listening. But Star left a question in the chat box. Would you like me to read it out?
Yeah, sorry, I'll just get the video back on somehow. I've just got to work out how to do it. I've got to stop sharing the screen. Is the screen still being shared?
It is, yes.
Okay. Oh, there it is there. All right, yeah, fire away, Mark, sorry.
That's okay. Now, did you hear what I said when
I did.
You did?
No, I didn't hear it, sorry.
Oh, okay, that's okay. So Star's gone to bed, but Terry's still watching. But Star left a question in the chat, hoping that you might be able to address it. So,
yep.
So I just want Brian to comment on how this all works when working with individuals who have intellectual disabilities and or other comorbid disorders, often living in supported accommodation and on medications. How can we be of service here? What's a priority, or how can we best support individuals in this situation? And just mentions that she works with those people and that often trauma is a key component. Yeah,
the answer's the same for everything and everyone. You just ask the people what's the most fun thing you could do right now. And if it's not dualistic in nature, support them in it, right? All disabilities, inabilities, whatever. It's just where's the energy able to go, where it cannot not go. If they've got a disability, it means the energies can't go in certain directions. So like I talk about with the soul elements, the more you do the soul elements, the more it actually builds the pathways of what your potential is, right? If somebody's got a disability, just channel it in the directions of their strengths. Don't worry about their weaknesses. Their weaknesses will disappear the more they expand on their strengths. So it becomes all encompassing through that, right? Diversify it as much as possible. But, you know, if you've got anybody acting out anything, anyone playing up about anything, just to ask them, what's the most fun thing you could do? What's the most creative thing you could do? If you could go anywhere right now, what would you do? The what, when, how, where, why, and who questions, yeah? You just ask them. And if they have any connection within themselves, they will tell you. I asked a child one day, what would you like to do if you could do anything at all right now? What would you do? And he said, go to McDonald's. Yeah, obviously that's not the right answer, right? But you'd find it. You'd say what would be. You know, you'd have to get creative and navigate your way around that. But it's the same answer for everything. It's all emotions are just the lack of fun and creativity and spontaneity. Yeah. So people get pissed off when their spontaneity and their creativity is suppressed or oppressed. That's bottom line, right? But why is one person imposing their will on another? All the reasons I just explained. Yeah, make sense?
Very good.
So any other questions?
There's none in the chat box, but just extending on that, I might put my 2 cents worth in.
Okay.
So there's the 3 core there, which most people would obviously recognize them as what we would label as negative emotions.
Yeah.
How do we address the guys like, your Joe Dispenzas of the world and so forth that have, let's call them facilitation exercises, or they would call them meditations around, joy and bliss and all those things and anchoring those states and all the NLP stuff that does that.
Yeah.
How do we address that as, I guess, being the false, I guess it's a false reality, but.
Again, good question. The difference is, like, you can give a person who's this is the 6 natures of personal reality is what you're actually asking me about, right? To those of you that don't know, there's 6 natures of personal reality. There's true and false negative, true and false positive, and true and false awareness. If you get somebody, you know, who's a keynote speaker and they're true positive with false awareness, the guidance, the meditations, the facilitation exercises they share, if they're sharing the same exercise as somebody who's got a true positive with true awareness, they will get more out of it than what the person sharing it will, right? But more often than not, the blind leading the blind is that the true positives with false awareness are still limiting people, and the actual intent behind the facilitation exercises doesn't really carry enough weight. This is why I shared the blog. What did I call it again? What was the one I called it, Mark, about, the
dumb and the dumbfounded, or?
No, the real one. You have to expect miracle ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to be realistic and expect miracles. The intent behind that, the meditation, is that you're either coming from a supernatural state within yourself, right? So what most people are doing is they're doing imagining being in the state. But remember, the difference between the facilitation exercises of imaginings and visualizing is if you're in that state, you're visualizing, expressing, and experiencing that state. But if you're not in that state, trying to get into that state, you have to imagine it, right? So you can get true and false positives in the imaginings, or you can get a true awareness within the imaginings. Yeah, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, it does.
So yeah, most people don't have the ability to make the distinctions between the true and false positive and the true and false awareness, and the combinations of the true positive with false. The true positives with false awareness is the most common trait within people helping people at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. But that's part of it in my book if you need to know more.
Excellent.
So
the other one that came up for me was when you had close to the end there, when you had the different slides up with grief and fear and so forth. Given that the collective is in fear over a phony virus,
yeah,
what are they overall as a collective? What are they not celebrating and honouring?
The power of now.
Mm.
It was like, why talk about something in somebody else's world? It's like I was talking to that guy, a wonderful guy I was talking to. He says, nobody knows anybody who's got it. Nobody knows of anybody who knows of anybody who's got it. So that, like, again, like everything about it is just completely not even worthy of a comment. It's such a joke, right? But if we're not able to support each other in the here and now, then you know, the whole duality just rears its ugly head. You know, it is all or nothing, right? All our energies are being focused in the here and now, creating nirvana, and just basically sitting down, shutting up and being quiet and getting on with it. Or we're justifying and explaining all our reasons to be upset about something, which effectively is none of our business, right? Like I said, the document, the Universal Declaration of Independence and Sovereignty is very simple. I mind my own business. I expect you to do the same. If you come and interfere with me, I'll deal with you, and everybody else who's living that sovereignty will help me deal with you. Otherwise, just bugger off and leave me alone, right? So this is where if everybody did claim that level of empowerment within themselves and live with that amount of honor, you got to remember the lack of neurological development and integration means there's no integrity, right? People are getting upset at the lack of integrity. If I get everybody to do a neurological test and they're only at the infant level, they're not integrated enough to be able to function. So why throw all the doubt, judgment, question, guilt, shame, and blame at them for lacking integrity, right? So in that sense, it's laughable, right? But if everybody just minded their own business, went back to living in the here and now, having the fun, being in the flow, we would all literally, like I said, all their energies, like a magnet, we would all go in the same direction with the same intents and purposes, and we might just get somewhere, yeah, which will be in the opposite direction to where we're going. But if we keep standing there, pointing back at all the factors that's pulling us back and holding us back, we will never go anywhere. We have to redirect that energy towards something that's true, the new, and that's creative. Yeah. So, anyone else got any questions?
There's nothing in the chat box, but Marco's just thrown something in there. Hi, is the reticular activating system false reality? What is actually happening with that?
Oh God, I'm too tired to go into that now. But yeah, I mean, most people's, nearly everything the neuroscience knows about the brain is limited. There's a positive, negative, and divine component to every pathway, every part of the brain. And most people are only got a dualistic interpretation of the brain. I've got a completely different perspective of that. And that's all just another conversation. It's too off topic, really. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw in there too, didn't at the start, but I'll link to it in a sec. Brian put up a post the other day about resharing the Schaefer cycle video, and most of us here in Australia are coming into the point of time where it's a time that we can start, if it's appropriate, looking to the detox phase. So it might be good for those that have watched that video to revisit it and make sure you start preparing for that as well.
Yeah, watch the video as many times as you need to get your head and heart around it, because I used to have people ringing me up all the time, having come undone with doing the wrong stage at the wrong cycle and all the rest of it. So that's why I put that out there, to prevent. Prevention's better than cure, and I just want to prevent everybody from doing things the wrong way. Yeah. So. Alrighty, well, I think that's it. There's no other questions. Well, I'm very grateful, everybody, that those of you that stayed with me. It's very difficult to keep all this on. Oh, you want to see Petals? I better show you Petals. Come here, little one. Come on. So here's little Petals. She's got herself a little collar and bell now. I just woke her up. Oh.
You could hear it throughout the...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's totally good. She's been with the animal chiropractor, so she's feeling a lot better now. So
very good. I'm just dragging that video up so people can get onto that one. Now at the start of the call as well, I popped the dates for the events and so forth. So if anyone's got any questions about those, obviously Brian can be contacted about. If you're a bit unsure what one might suit you or what that might be, or you can get in touch with me as well. But all the dates are up there. I'm just popping that link in there now. There we go. Charlie actually just dropped something there. Are there other ways of arresting emotional energy and converting it to empowering energy other than the breath?
Short answer, no. What are the forces of the breath? The forces of the breath, which is the essence of life. It's what keeps you here. And if you're not at one with the creative forces of the divine giving you the breath, then you're separate from that. The divine, the true flow of life is the breath of life. And the information that comes within that, which is the intuition, at least the intuition then going deeper into the heartbeat. So no, there's not. It's like if you take big doses of plant medicines, you have to stay with every phase of every breath. Yeah. And you see how intense it is. Yeah. So essentially, no. I mean, you can do it using any aspect. Yeah. Like plant medicines are essentially a dietary nutritional one, but the breath is bringing, the neurological component. This is what I talked about in the blog, Staying Present. Was it called Staying Present, Mark?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just the importance of smiling and that sort of stuff and keeping correct posture. It's a combination of everything that I've just covered, but the breath is the key, right? It's what brings everything together. And Esther and Williams, emotions will arise in the case of imbalance. Being open and creative is not called as an emotional state. No, being open and creative is not an emotional state. Right? Excitement is an emotion. Enthusiasm is a quality. Yeah. So an emotion, there's degrees of them, right? The emotional states are degrees of anger, degrees of grief, terror, and rage. there's degrees of grief, terror, and rage, but there's no degrees of divine qualities. So when you're in a state of creativity and openness and flow, that's you're accessing all the divine qualities of peace and love and that sort of thing. So yeah. So anything else to add, Mark?
No, I don't think so. A little bit further back up the chat, I did pop in a link there if anyone feels like they'd like to make a donation for tonight's time that Brian shared with us. You're more than welcome to do so. There's a link to his page that allows you to do that to the foundation, as well as a link to the book. So if you haven't started reading the book, there's plenty to get through there as well before the new book comes out, Brian.
Yes, yeah, I'm hard at work getting it proofread at the moment. So it's amazing how many little things I need to keep changing until it's perfect. So, but yeah, it's coming along together really nicely. So got good feedback so far. So yeah, so I'm hoping that all the events go ahead, and it's going to screw me financially and everything if they don't. So any donations would be greatly appreciated. So things have been rather challenging these last. Well, I haven't really done any real events or anything like that since November last year, I think. So
great.
Yeah, so it's been interesting times. But anyway, yeah, we'll wait and see. So. Yeah, thanks for everybody. Hopefully this video will be up and posted very shortly, and on the BitChute channel and Mark's channel. So thanks again, Mark, for a brilliant hosting effort again, and it's always good to have you do it. Saves me having to do it.
Thank you, Brian. It was lovely to be back online, and yeah, I think it's a good little lead up. Yeah, obviously to the events coming shortly, and we have discussed maybe doing another one in between now and then, but we'll let that unfold in divine timing. And in the meantime, everyone go out and put a big smile on your face, breathe, and have some fun.
Definitely. All right, thanks everybody, and catch up with you next time. See you then.